I picked out this story just for you. Let's listen to it.
Chapter 1. The Solarium of Solitude. The observation deck was a cathedral of light. A single, vast hemisphere of transparisteel formed the floor and walls, revealing the terrifying, beautiful majesty of the yellow dwarf star, designated Cygnus X-1, in its full, unfiltered glory. Below, a river of plasma the size of a continent roiled and churned, its incandescent surface a tapestry of gold, orange, and violent white. Solar flares, like the lashes of some cosmic god, lashed out from the photosphere, arching millions of kilometers into the corona before collapsing back into the stellar inferno. The air inside the deck was cool and sterile, recycled endlessly by humming life support systems, a stark contrast to the primal chaos on display. The only sound was the low, resonant hum of the deck's magnetic stabilizers and the faint, almost subliminal thrum of the star's own magnetic field, translated into a palpable vibration that resonated in the bones. Standing at the very center of this panoramic view, seemingly oblivious to the stellar fury, was the zero-G mechanic. Clad in a simple, unadorned gray ship suit, he was a study in paradoxical stillness. His name was a designation, not an identity, a fact he had long since accepted. He moved with a liquid grace that defied the deck's artificial gravity, his body a perfect machine calibrated for precision and efficiency. His hair was closely cropped, his eyes a placid, unreadable gray, reflecting the star's light without absorbing any of its emotion. He was a master of the void, a technician who could speak the silent language of quantum entanglements and gravitational singularities, yet here, in the face of the galaxy's most awesome engine, he seemed utterly detached, merely a spectator at an impossibly grand theater. His tools were not in evidence, for he was not here to work. He was here to wait. The soft hiss of the pneumatically sealed doors announced the arrival of his guest. The Kinetic Warrior, Vaelen of the Shadow Network, entered without ceremony. He was the mechanic's opposite in every conceivable way. Where the mechanic was placid, Vaelen was coiled energy. He wore the Shadow Network's tactical gear, a form-fitting suit of non-reflective black polymer that seemed to drink the light, its surfaces etched with faint, circuit-like patterns that pulsed with a deep, crimson glow. His movements were economical but sharp, each step a potential pivot, each shift of his weight a prelude to violence. His face was sharp, all high cheekbones and a strong jaw, but it was his eyes that held the power. They were a startling shade of amber, and they burned with a fervent intensity, a zealot's fire that promised absolute conviction. He was a weapon given flesh, a living conduit for the kinetic force generated by motion and impact, trained to turn an opponent's momentum against them with devastating efficiency. Vaelen stopped a respectful 3 meters from the mechanic, his gaze flickering from the man to the star and back again. The heat from the observation deck's transparency was palpable, enough to make a normal man sweat, but neither of them seemed to notice. Zero-G mechanic. Vaelen's voice was a low, resonant baritone, carefully modulated. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. The journey from the Umbral Vale is arduous. The mechanic turned his head slowly, his gray eyes meeting Vaelen's amber ones. There was no curiosity in his gaze, only acknowledgement. The Shadow Network's navigation charts are efficient. Your arrival was anticipated within a 0.02% margin of error. There is no need for gratitude. He turned his gaze back to the star. You wish to discuss my allegiance. Vaelen took a slow, deliberate breath, the crimson pulse on his suit brightening for a fraction of a second.
Yes.
The Shadow Network has watched your work for many cycles. You are unaligned, a free agent in a galaxy defined by factions. You have solved problems for the Imperial Coalition, brokered tech for the Syndicate, and even repaired a biodome for the Ascendant Cult. Your skills are legendary. But a tool without a master is a tool waiting to be used by anyone. We believe a tool of your caliber deserves a purpose. Purpose is a subjective construct, the mechanic stated, his tone flat. I solve mechanical problems. That is my function. Vaelen took a step closer, his body language shifting from respectful to earnest. The kinetic energy around him seemed to intensify, the air itself growing warmer. What we offer is more than a contract. It is an understanding, a philosophy. The galaxy is a system of control, a cage built by the powerful, the coalition, the ascendant, the syndicate. They hoard technology, they limit freedom, they dictate the flow of information and life. The Shadow Network seeks to break that cage. We do not seek power for its own sake, but to return the power to the individual, to create true freedom through chaos. A new figure emerged from the shadows near the door, a silent sentinel. This was Broker Xylo, Vaelen's second. Xylo was a wiry man with eyes that never settled, constantly scanning the environment for threats or opportunities. He did not speak, but his presence was a statement of support, a subtle reminder that Vaelen was not alone. Xylo's role was not to fight, but to ensure the information flow was secure and that no other faction was listening in on this pivotal conversation. The mechanic remained unmoved. Chaos is an inefficient state. It leads to entropy, to system failure. My function is to prevent failure. There are systems worth failing, Vaelen insisted, his passion breaking through his controlled exterior. The system that allows the Imperial Coalition to condemn 1 billion souls on a fringe world to starvation because they refuse to pay a tithe. The system that lets the Ascendant cult turn living beings into grotesque biological machines. We are not destroyers, mechanic. We are recalibrators. We introduce a variable that forces the system to adapt, to evolve into something better. With your abilities, you wouldn't just be fixing a starship drive. You would be helping to rewrite the source code of the galaxy. The mechanic was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on a particularly violent solar flare erupting from the star's limb. The light of the flare illuminated his face, casting it in a harsh, golden light. For the first time, a flicker of something other than placidity crossed his features. Not emotion, but calculation. He was processing Vaelen's proposal, running 1 million simulations in his mind, weighing the variables, the potential outcomes, the systemic implications of joining such a cause. Your arguments are based on emotional and philosophical datasets, the mechanic finally said, his voice as even as before. They're prone to error and contradiction. However, the core principle, introducing a controlled variable to force systemic evolution, has a certain logical elegance. Vaelen's amber eyes glowed with triumph. Then you will consider our oath? I will listen to its terms, the mechanic corrected. He turned to face Vaelen fully, the star at his back, transforming his silhouette into a dark god against a backdrop of fire. Define the parameters of this allegiance. What is the function you require of me? And what are the failure states? Chapter 2. The Calculus of Conviction. Vaelen's face tightened, the triumph in his eyes hardening into resolve. He had expected this. The mechanic was a machine of logic, and to appeal to him was to speak in equations, not poetry. The function is simple in its statement, profound in its execution. We require you to be the network's failsafe, the ultimate problem solver. When a system is too secure for our slicers, when a target is too well guarded for our assassins, when a piece of technology is too alien for our researchers, we will send you. You will be the variable that cannot be predicted, the force that cannot be stopped. He gestured towards the star, a sweeping motion that encompassed its terrifying power. Look at it. A perfect fusion engine, providing light, heat, and life to 12 worlds. But it is also a bomb, waiting to go nova. It could scorch those worlds to cinders in an instant. It is both creation and destruction. The Shadow Network sees the galaxy the same way. The Coalition's order is a stagnation that will lead to a slow death. The Ascendant's purity is a corruption that will consume everything. We are the controlled burn, the necessary chaos that clears the deadwood for new growth. We need you to be our scalpel, to make the precise cuts when we need to level a mountain. The mechanic listened impassively, his internal processors cataloging every word, analyzing Vaelen's rhetoric for inconsistencies. And the failure states, he pressed. What happens if I determine the network's variable will cause irreparable systemic collapse? or if the function I am asked to perform conflicts with my core operational parameters. Your core operational parameters will be aligned with the network's goals, Vaelen said smoothly, but there was an edge to his voice. You will have access to all our intelligence, all our strategic models. You will see the calculations we have made. You will understand that the short-term chaos is necessary for long-term stability. As for failure, the only failure is inaction. To stand by and allow the current system to grind the galaxy into dust is the ultimate failure state. As he spoke, another figure materialized from the deck's periphery, this one on the mechanic's side. She was an elderly woman with silver hair tied in a severe bun, her face a map of wrinkles that spoke of a long life spent observing. Her name was Alara, and she was the keeper of this observation deck, the last remnant of a scientific order that predated the major factions. She was not a warrior or a spy, but a custodian of knowledge, and she had served as the mechanic's silent confidant and moral compass for decades. Alara stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Vaelen. The mechanic's function, as you call it, has always been guided by a principle of preservation, she said, her voice frail but sharp. He mends. He restores. He does not break for the sake of breaking. The Shadow Network asks him to become a hammer when he is a watchmaker. Vaelen's amber eyes narrowed as he looked at Alara. He had not accounted for this variable. With respect, ma'am, a watchmaker's tools are useless against a tidal wave. Sometimes a hammer is the only thing that can shatter the dam holding the flood back. A tidal wave can be redirected, Alara countered. A dam can be reinforced. Destruction is the easiest solution, not the wisest. The Kinetic Warrior's patience was wearing thin. The philosophical debate was inefficient. He needed to force the issue. He turned his full attention back to the mechanic, ignoring the old woman. This is not a debate, mechanic. It is an invitation. The Shadow Network does not extend it lightly. We are offering you a place at the center of the galaxy's future. A chance to be more than a glorified repairman. He took another step forward, closing the distance between them to a mere arm's length. The air crackled with the energy he radiated. The oath is not a contract of servitude. It is a pact of shared purpose. You swear to use your unique abilities to further the cause of freedom. We swear to provide you with the resources, the intelligence, and the unwavering support to do so. We become your network, and you become our keystone. The mechanic held Vaelen's gaze, his gray eyes like two calm pools of mercury against the fiery backdrop. And if I refuse? Vaelen's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his muscles coiling. Then you will remain an unaligned variable. A risk. A loose end. We cannot afford such risks. We would be forced to mitigate the problem. You understand. It was a threat, veiled but unmistakable. The Kinetic Warrior's high strength was not just for physical combat. It was a tool of intimidation, a physical manifestation of his will to dominate. The mechanic did not react to the threat, but his internal systems flagged it. The probability of a hostile outcome had just increased by 47.3%. Alara stepped closer to the mechanic, placing a gentle hand on his arm. He is not a problem to be mitigated. He is a man to be respected, she said softly, her voice a plea. But Vaelen was done talking. He believed the mechanic's high wits would understand the logical inevitability of his offer. The sheer scale of the network, the futility of standing alone against the tide of history. It was time for the final push. The choice is yours, Vaelen said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. Stand with us and help build a new galaxy, or stand in our way and be swept away by it. Swear the oath. 0G Mechanic. Swear it now. The mechanic looked from Vaelen's burning eyes to Alara's worried face, and then back to the star. The solar storm raged, a maelstrom of raw, untamed power. For a moment, the vast silence of the observation deck was broken only by the hum of the stabilizers and the star's deep, resonant thrum. The decision hung in the superheated air, a choice between order and chaos, between preservation and revolution, between the watchmaker and the hammer. The mechanic's mind, a perfect engine of logic, ran its final calculation. Chapter 3. The Oath of the Variable. The mechanic's gaze lingered on the star's chaotic surface for a final, extended moment. The roiling plasma, the violent flares, the sheer untamed energy, it was a system of perfect, brutal physics. It operated without ideology, without morality, without purpose beyond its own existence. In its raw, unthinking state, he found a strange form of clarity. He turned back to Vaelen, his face a mask of serene neutrality. The argument for introducing a controlled variable to force systemic evolution is logically sound, he began, his voice cutting through the tension with clinical precision. Stagnant systems, like the Imperial Coalition's bloated bureaucracy or the Ascendant Cult's dogmatic bioengineering, exhibit critical vulnerabilities. The probability of their eventual, catastrophic failure is high. A targeted application of chaos could, in theory, mitigate a larger, more uncontrolled collapse. Vaelen's stance relaxed slightly, a flicker of triumph returning to his amber eyes.
Exactly.
You see it. I see the data, the mechanic corrected, holding up a hand. However, your model has a critical flaw. It assumes control. Chaos, by its fundamental nature, is not controllable. It can be initiated, but its propagation and final state are subject to a near-infinite number of variables. The probability of your controlled burn becoming a galaxy-consuming wildfire is significant. Broker Xylo shifted his weight, his hand subtly moving towards a concealed data slicer at his belt. The conversation was not going as smoothly as Vaelen's confidence had suggested. We are aware of the risks, Vaelen said, his voice firm. We have models, contingencies. Models based on incomplete data, the mechanic interrupted, his tone unwavering. You are attempting to apply order to a concept that defies it. I cannot, in good conscience, align my function with a strategy based on such a high probability of catastrophic error. The potential for system-wide failure is unacceptable. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, the star's fire suddenly feeling distant and cold. Vaelen's face hardened into a mask of stone. The amber in his eyes grew dark, like cooling embers. Then you refuse the oath. I refuse the premise of the oath as it has been presented, the mechanic stated. Elara squeezed the mechanic's arm, a small, proud smile touching her lips. He chooses preservation, she murmured. Vaelen looked from the mechanic to Elara, and then back again. A profound sense of disappointment, cold and sharp, settled over him. He had believed. He had seen the legend of the zero-G mechanic and thought it a sign that this unaligned master of systems was the one who could tip the scales. But the man before him was not a revolutionary. He was a maintenance drone, content to oil the gears of a dying machine. Then my analysis was correct, Vaelen said, his voice now devoid of all warmth. You are a risk, a powerful, unaligned variable that cannot be allowed to fall into the hands of our enemies, or to simply exist. He took a final step back, settling into a combat stance. Broker Xylo, initiate blackout protocol. No record of this conversation leaves this room. Xylo nodded, already pulling a sophisticated device from his belt. It was a local EMP generator, designed to fry any recording systems within a 50-meter radius. As his fingers flew across the keypad, Elara moved with a speed that belied her age. She wasn't a fighter, but she was a guardian of this place. She slammed her palm onto a glowing panel on the wall. Elara, override code Gamma 7. Lock down the observation deck. Full security protocols. A shimmering energy field crackled to life across the transparent dome, and heavy blast doors began to slide down over the entrance. Vaelen cursed under his breath. He hadn't expected the old woman to have that kind of authority. It doesn't matter, he snarled, his attention fixed solely on the mechanic. This ends now. The Kinetic Warrior exploded into motion. He was a blur of black polymer and crimson light, crossing the distance between them in a heartbeat. His high strength was channeled into pure, explosive speed. He didn't throw a punch or a kick. He aimed to deliver a single, decisive palm strike to the mechanic's chest, a blow that would shatter bone and rupture organs, leveraging his own momentum and the deck's artificial gravity to amplify its power. It was an attack designed to end the fight before it began. The mechanic did not move to evade. He did not raise a block. As Vaelen's hand shot forward, the mechanic's own hand moved in a small, precise arc, intersecting the path of Vaelen's wrist. It was not a block. It was a realignment. His fingers, with impossible dexterity, found a specific cluster of nerves on Vaelen's forearm. There was a soft click, a sound like a tiny cog slipping into place. Vaelen's entire arm went limp, the kinetic energy he had gathered dissipating into a useless tremor. He stumbled forward, his momentum betrayed, his eyes wide with disbelief. Pain, sharp and electric, shot up his arm. He had never seen anything like it. It wasn't a counterstrike. It was a system error. The mechanic had treated his body like a malfunctioning machine and had simply pressed the reset button. The mechanic stepped inside Vaelen's compromised guard, his gray eyes still calm, still analytical. Your technique is based on channeling force. It is impressive but predictable. You rely on a single, powerful vector of attack. He raised his other hand, not in a strike, but with his fingers poised delicately in the air. My function is to understand all vectors, to identify the system's true weak point. He flicked his fingers, not touching Vaelen, but striking the air an inch from his temple. The Kinetic Warrior grunted, his vision exploding in a flash of white light as his inner ear was violently disrupted. His sense of balance, his entire kinesthetic awareness was shattered. He staggered back, his body refusing to obey him. He was a master of motion, and he had been rendered motionless by a gesture. Chapter 4. The Recalibration. Vaelen crashed to his knees, the world spinning violently around him. He tried to summon his kinetic energy to ground himself, but the connection was severed. His own body felt alien, a collection of disconnected parts sending conflicting signals. He was a weapon that had been disassembled by a touch. Broker Xylo, seeing his leader disabled, abandoned the EMP protocol. He drew a compact kinetic pistol from a concealed holster and aimed it at the mechanic. "Get away from him," Xylo yelled, his voice tight with panic. Before he could fire, Elara was there. She didn't have a weapon. She simply grabbed a heavy, titanium maintenance case from a nearby console and swung it with the strength of her conviction. The case connected with Xylo's wrist, sending the pistol skittering across the floor. Xylo cried out in pain and surprise, cradling his hand as he stared at the old woman in shock. "The mechanic does not fight your war, Xylo," Elara said, her voice ringing with an authority that filled the chamber. "But he will defend himself. And he is not alone." The mechanic paid no attention to the scuffle. He knelt in front of the fallen Kinetic Warrior, his gray eyes examining Vaelen's condition with detached curiosity. "Your nervous system is resilient. The disruption should have been total. Your psionic training with the Shadow Network has augmented your biological systems. An interesting variable." "Finish it," Vaelen spat, forcing the words through the disorientation. He looked up, his amber eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. "You've won. Kill me." "Killing you would be an inefficient use of resources," the mechanic stated, his voice flat. "You are a valuable asset. Your conviction, however misdirected, is powerful. The problem is not the component, but the system it is being asked to operate within." The mechanic reached out and placed 2 fingers against the side of Vaelen's neck. Vaelen flinched, expecting a killing blow, another nerve pinch that would end him. Instead, a strange, soothing warmth spread from the mechanic's touch. The violent spinning in his head subsided. The pain in his arm receded. The mechanic was not just disabling systems. He could repair them. He was recalibrating him. "I will not swear your oath, Vaelen of the Shadow Network," the mechanic said, his voice a low, steady hum that seemed to blend with the thrum of the star. "Your model is flawed. Chaos is not a tool to be wielded. It is a force to be respected. To try and control it is the ultimate hubris." He stood up, leaving Vaelen kneeling on the floor, his senses slowly returning. "However, Your premise that the current galactic system is heading for a catastrophic failure is correct. Intervention is required, but not with a hammer. It requires a scalpel. It requires a new variable, one that does not serve the Shadow Network or the Coalition or any other faction, one that serves the system itself. Vaelen looked up, confusion warring with the lingering humiliation in his eyes. What are you saying? I am unaligned, the mechanic said, turning to face the star once more. I will remain so, but I will no longer be a passive observer. I will act as a balancing agent. When a faction like the Syndicate threatens to destabilize a sector for profit, I will intervene. When the Ascendant cult attempts to unleash a bioplague, I will intervene. And yes, he glanced back at Vaelen. When the Shadow Network's controlled burn threatens to become an inferno, I will intervene. I will be the check on your power, as I will be a check on all others. I will be the 0 point, the constant. He extended a hand down to Vaelen, not as an enemy, but as an equal. I will not swear your oath, but I offer you a new understanding, a new function. Continue your fight. Challenge the systems. But know that there is now a boundary you cannot cross. There is a variable in the equation that will always seek equilibrium. Help me maintain that balance or be stopped by it. The choice is yours. Vaelen stared at the offered hand. The mechanic's high wits had not just defeated him, it had redefined the entire conflict. It was a move so profound, so far beyond a simple victory or defeat, that it left him speechless. The Shadow Network sought to create chaos to bring down order. The Imperial Coalition sought to impose order to suppress chaos. The mechanic was proposing a third way, to manage the interplay between them, to be the gravitational constant that kept the galaxy from flying apart or collapsing in on itself. Slowly, shakily, Vaelen reached up and took the mechanic's hand. The mechanic pulled him to his feet. You are not a tool, Vaelen said, his voice filled with a new kind of awe. You're a system. I am a solution, the mechanic corrected. He released Vaelen's hand and looked to Alara, who gave him a small, knowing nod. He then turned to Broker Xylo, who was still rubbing his wrist. Your EMP device. Deactivated. This conversation will not be erased. It will be the first entry in a new log. The log of the equilibrium. Xylo, looking from his leader to the mechanic, slowly nodded and deactivated the device, his eyes wide with the dawning realization of what had just transpired. The heavy blast doors retracted, the lockdown overridden by Alara's command. Vaelen straightened his tactical suit, his pride wounded, but his mind racing with the implications. The Shadow Network will need to recalibrate its strategy, he said, a new respect in his tone. We will not forget this. 0G mechanic. I am counting on it, the mechanic replied, his gaze already back on the star. The solar storm was beginning to subside, the fiery surface settling back into its more familiar, rhythmic churn. Vaelen and Xylo did not wait for an escort. They walked towards the exit, their purpose changed, their mission reframed. As the doors hissed shut behind them, Alara came to stand beside the mechanic. A heavy burden you have taken upon yourself, she said softly. A system requires maintenance, the mechanic answered, his gray eyes reflecting the now steady light of the distant star. I have merely expanded my jurisdiction.